A couple months ago, I played Playdead's Limbo, and a lot of comments came in telling me that if I liked Limbo, I should check out their next game called Inside that pretty much built on everything they had done in Limbo, but things were just a little bit more crisp. And so the time has come to check out Inside, and I immediately try to double back to the left like we did in the last game, but sadly, no achievement yet. Inside is another 2D puzzle game where the main focus is on moving to the right, so pretty much the exact same as Limbo if you watched that video. However, I would say this game gets off to a much hotter start. We pretty much immediately run into a truck out in the middle of these woods, and we see a man loading something into it. There's also these weird little pod things in the background, and we're not really sure what's going on here. The truck pulls away, but there are still some more men out in these woods, walking around with flashlights, and they appear to be wearing some sort of masks. They're definitely looking for something, so we're just gonna go ahead and push right past them. But sadly, our life as a video game protagonist can't quite go that easy. We stumble down a hill into some water, and those enemy flashlights immediately flick right over to us, and suddenly there is a dog chasing us down. We narrowly manage to escape this dog by jumping over a cliff, but I just want to include that the dog noises in this game are actually pretty scary. We continue moving forward, but obviously these guys know about us now, and they definitely don't want us walking away. So we immediately start to run from one guy, and this first time we get caught, and we learn that these are not good men. On our next life, we make it away from the first guy, but then immediately get gunned down by a second. Wow, this is a weird start to this game compared to Limbo. We managed to get our stuff together and run a little bit more efficiently away from the men and the dogs, and we jump down into the river below. But this river actually works pretty well for us. We hang a left and we find one of these weird glowing balls that will be the source of all of the achievements in this game. We go ahead and interact with it and pull the machine apart, earning the achievement Murky Waters. We finish swimming across the water in the intended direction, and luckily the people above don't spot us. But things aren't quite so lucky when we notice a lot of dead pigs that are on the beach. Ooh. We quickly disappear into a big cornfield that signifies the start of the next area, the farm. We quickly learn that not everything on this farm is actually dead, because there's a big group of little chickies that are following us around. So naturally our first move is to take all of those little chickies and set them in front of a machine that sucks them up and launches them at a very fast speed into a hay bale we can use to climb through into the next area. We end up climbing up onto the roof of the barn, and we see that it's raining now. I was a little bit worried about slipping off, but we don't actually need to worry about that because we can always just jump down into this cart full of dead pigs. Yeesh. And we also notice some somewhat familiar white worm-looking things poking out of those pigs. We managed to press on a little bit, but my fears are quickly realized. Those little white worms are the same mind control things that were in Limbo, and now they've taken over some of the local wildlife too, as we get absolutely run over by that pig. We use the pig as a makeshift battering ram to stun it momentarily while we pull the worm out of him. And then we pull the now helpless pig over to this mysterious ceiling light that we found. And this is where we get into something that is very different from Limbo. Once we jump into one of these light fixtures, we suddenly begin to take over all of these people in the background area of the level. While controlling them, they can do everything we can do, and they're normally in large groups. We don't really know what relationship we have with those people we're mind controlling at the moment, but they're helpful for getting us to move on to the next area, where we approach this big stadium-looking building with a mysterious line of people heading into it. Oh man. Maybe it's not a stadium and it's more like a factory? I don't know, it's definitely being assembled, whatever it is. We solve a little puzzle that leads us to a safe, which we naturally push right off the little edge that it's sitting on. And hey, it's pretty lucky for us that we did, because we follow the yellow wire and earn our second achievement, Left Behind. We climb up and get a rooftop view, and this area really reminds me of the hotel area of Limbo. Not just the rooftops and the sign and everything, but I also miss a jump and plummet down. But that's actually helpful because we see another achievement waiting for us. It turns out that I missed a pretty obvious pipe and ladder combo that leads down to earn our third achievement, Obscure Foundations. As we're moving between the buildings, we see that the line of people that we saw before is now moving, and they don't seem to be moving quite like regular people do. It turns out that it's not just the people and the dogs that are trying to get us. It actually turns out the robots want us as well. Now, when I powered this guy on, I didn't think he was going to be friendly, but the speed at which he took us out is a little crazy. We start walking through a pretty regular looking room that shouldn't be a problem, but the floorboards break out from under us, dropping us down into the line of the people that we saw before. A spotlight very quickly gets shown on us, and it's clear that we need to act fast and pretend that we're some of these mindless people that are walking in a line. The gameplay here is nothing complicated. You basically just walk in the pattern of all the people around you. But I've got to say that this whole section coming up is probably my favorite part of this whole game. It's just so tense and I had no idea what was going to happen. I don't really know the reason why all of this is being done, but it becomes a little bit more clear what's going on when we walk into a box where we need to perform jumps that are timed with all of the others, as we see a group of the masked people looking on at us. There's even a little baby with a mask on. This is so weird. The line continues moving forward, and I guess our plan was just to keep on following it, but a dog notices that we don't quite match everyone else, and a flashlight gets shown on us, so we've got to make our escape pretty quickly. The non-brainwormed humans are definitely operating a factory here, so we need to start making a move to get away from these people that clearly want to harm us, and we do that by dropping into a pool of water. Now, where does this go? Who knows? Are the barrels that are floating in it a sign for concern? Probably not. We end up back on a rooftop and we get exposed to a puzzle that this game absolutely loves, involving avoiding these moving spotlights. They're not super complicated, but I don't know, I enjoyed them. It's nice to do something a little bit simple. We run into a couple more humans, but there is a crucial difference with these humans, and they own a submarine. And it just so happens we're coming up on a water level. Who would have thought such a coincidence could happen? So because those people before wronged us, we decide to go ahead and right that wrong and take this submarine for ourselves. No idea what those guys were using this submarine for, but it turns out that this level actually goes pretty deep down. And in order to progress further through this level, we need to use this submarine's special move, which is kind of like a charged up dash that we can use to break down walls. We get to one point where we spend a lot of time bashing our head into the wall, literally and figuratively, until I realize that I can get out of the submarine and just swim through the hole that we made. I wasted a lot of time there. The only real kind of jump scare in this game comes in this area where I click a button and a door immediately opens and flattens me with a bunch of rolling cylinders. We proceed through the cylinder door now that we know what we're doing, and we get introduced to a very large room inside of a building that seems to be filled with vegetation, weirdly enough. We also get introduced to a very important mechanic here with this box that we can propel. And with the little boost we get from that box, we can open up a gate that allows us access to our submarine once again. We continue our descent and we find an area that was very clearly once not underwater, so this is also a little bit weird. We find a small side tunnel that leads to our next achievement, Friends in Low Places, and this has a super cool puzzle where we're controlling different sets of the guys with the mind control helmets. Pretty cool stuff. Back on the main path, we bust down a door and come face to face with the game's next big enemy. This sea-dwelling combination between a Cabbage Patch doll and the girl from The Ring is a pretty big threat to us, it seems like, but she's a little bit afraid of light, and we can use that to our advantage. I did make a slight mistake in my technique though, and she caught us in this first escape, and we learned that she is definitely not a fan of us. While light is her main weakness, she actually has another one too, slamming a door in her face. A classic technique. Sadly though, our sub time has come to an end as we eventually reach a beach, and obviously that's a no-go for us. We approach another factory-looking building where we open up the door and we immediately fall down into the depths below. We really gotta stop touching doors here. We find a room with a couple dudes hanging out and a switch. I hit the switch naturally and we see a big 19 light up on the wall. I kind of assumed that this was like a timer ticking down to an explosion, so I immediately ran away as fast as I could, but it's not. There was no ticking. I shouldn't have been afraid. We descend even lower into the depths of the factory where we find another mind control helmet thing, but this time it actually breaks off of its hold on the ceiling, so now we can run around with some of our friends. This is definitely a new development. And the nice thing about having so many friends is they have a whole lot of uses, such as pushing us on a big minecart into a new area we couldn't access before. And then in that new area we can use another propulsion device to find some more friends. And then we use those friends to rip down a wall in that area where our old friends couldn't quite reach. And that hole in the wall just so happens to lead down to another one of the really cool areas of this game, probably my second favorite. We come down to this little cave area where we find a torch nonchalantly burning on the wall, and we suddenly get accosted by dogs, but luckily we can bat them away with our torch. This eventually leads us to our 5th achievement orb called Pack Mentality. We return from Pack Mentality and we reunite our new friends with our old friends. Then we take our new giant group of friends to go get even more friends. And finally, we can gather all 20 of our friends on this pressure plate, which allows us to open up a door and move into the next area. Thanks, friends. Saying goodbye to our friends doesn't have to be so sad though, because we move into another super sick area of this game. There's some sort of big, sound blast that happens every couple seconds in this area, and it absolutely rocks everything that's around it. We need to be very careful about how we move through this area, and that's really what makes it super cool. Because if you're out in the open when that sound wave comes, you will get destroyed. Like, for example, maybe you find a moving door that is pretty good at keeping the sound away from you, but you better make sure it stays on the rails. But at least it's pretty funny when you get hit in this area. We come to what I expected to be the end of this area. We hop on an elevator and we start to descend until we realize that the sound isn't just above ground. And when we're in the elevator, when the sound goes off, we will still get rocked just the same. We crashed down a very long ways, but thankfully we landed in water and so we couldn't take fall damage. In the next room we see another one of those troll dolls that seems to be incubating in some water. Lucky we're not in there, right? Yeah, we have to dive in that water, and we're swimming past, and it seems like everything's gonna be okay, but suddenly she comes to life, and it becomes a very quick race to get back out of the water. Now that we don't have the sub, our means of escaping this lady is a little bit reduced. We can't do our move with the flashlight anymore, so we kind of resort to jumping off of high things or trying to trick her, but sometimes we do get caught still. One thing that hasn't changed from the good old sub days though is that the best way to stop them is by putting a wall in their face. That worked twice, so that'll probably be the last that we see of those guys, right? We start to move on and we see a big circular door that we go ahead and open, and we fall straight into the water. What was I saying about doors? And there's another girl here, what is going on? This is definitely a different American Girl doll than we saw previously though, and we know that she's gotta be hiding some secrets behind her, so we give her a quick skip around, and we earn the achievement Respite for diving back into the water and getting our next orb. But that still leaves us with the issue of getting away from this Barbie, and surprise surprise, it's the same solution, we just close a door on her. I am amazed that they let this work 3 times, surely the next one won't. We start to climb up a pretty shaky looking bridge when suddenly it collapses and we fall back into the water. Unfortunately for us, we haven't seen the last of these brats though, as we get grabbed by one final doll. We start getting pulled deep into the water, and I'm expecting it to cut back to black and to restart one more time any second here. But that doesn't seem to happen. We keep struggling, but this brat keeps forcing us down lower and lower. Eventually we descend low enough that it's pretty much just a fully black screen, but as we pass by a yellow light, it gets attached to us, and we know that these dolls are afraid of light, so we seem to be kind of saved, but that doesn't really help us this deep in the water. We float to the bottom of the water and our Beanie Baby is nowhere in sight, but what we do find is a large group of fish who seem to reinvigorate us, and we can actually breathe and swim underwater now. This was a very bizarre twist indeed. It once again becomes clear that this area was definitely not always underwater, and in fact we seem to be passing through some sort of doctor's office looking area. I could feel in my bones that there was going to be a secret hidden somewhere around here, and it also helps that I saw a yellow wire when we came down here, so we comb every inch of this level until we find a little hatch on the side that we can open up. We find orb number 7 to earn the achievement Unfathomable, and honestly that's kind of what I'm feeling with this whole underwater breathing thing. We thought we were finished with those super powerful wind blasts, but it turns out that one of the tunnels that we need to go through just so happens to be connected, and every time the wind goes off, we get blasted a little bit backwards. It's kind of annoying, but eventually we manage to make it through. Orb number 8 is also not far off. We happen to stumble into it, but we can't quite figure out how to get it, so we decide to go ahead and move forward a little bit. We very quickly get an answer though, as we find to progress in the main area, we need to move some beams around to hide from these pillars of light, and that just so happens to open up our next achievement. We return back to that last area and climb up to earn our next achievement, Clockwork, which really was very efficient. Our next descent will require a big leap, so we go ahead and jump off the edge. Directly into this hole on our very first try. Hey, we're reunited with our fishy friends. I'm beginning to notice a weird trend with this game where every time we move into a new room, we see a new creepy thing. That's so weird, right? In this room, there's these little tank battery looking things at the bottom that are connected to people floating in the ceiling. Normal stuff. We find a rogue propulsion cube that we definitely need to proceed in this level. We set it up to do some pretty sick tricks Tony Hawk style, and honestly I was weirdly impressed with just this little jump. I actually just thought that I was proceeding with the story here, but it turns out we can use our Tony Hawk box to jump up and hit a button and then end up in the room with our next achievement, Room for Reflection. It turns out that the thing that we actually need to do is set up 2 propulsion cubes to boost us up into the sky. Now that seems a little bit weird until you realize that the sky is actually made of water, so we can swim around. We open up the hatch of this weird ceiling dome, and we find that very quickly the water was actually pretty shallow and we're once again on the surface. We find ourselves in a big warehouse, and we see a cage that is absolutely filled with some of those mindless zombie guys. It's definitely been a while since we've had to deal with other humans, because we were obviously supposed to hide when more humans came into this room, but we didn't, and it turns out these guys still don't like us very much. We take our second chance at life, and we look at what this scene was actually supposed to be. The man in the forklift picks up the big cage full of people and backs it out of the warehouse, as another human and their child look on. This is kinda nefarious. We escape into another one of these floating human rooms, but it turns out that there's actually people down below inspecting the little pod things. They walk away before too long, which allows us to drop down into the room as well. We flick a conveniently placed lever on the wall, which raises the water level and conveniently drops all of those humans we saw before back onto the ground. Luckily, they're not too injured, and we've once again built our army of friends. The next area of the game is a little office, and I look out across a big window and see something that kind of reminds me of like a rocket ship with a bunch of people running towards it. This is surely not a cause for concern. Our ever-growing army of people allows us to open up a wall that we definitely wouldn't have been able to do on our own, which drops us onto the ground level where we saw those people running just moments ago. Our army helps us board the definitely not a rocket, and it's kind of a sad feeling to be leaving all of these guys behind. Maybe we'll see them again in another life. Now that we're finally inside of the main scientific lab, we see a lot of cages with some of the other people walking around in them, and there's clearly experiments going on. The other thing that we see is a large group of scientists that are peering into some sort of big tank, and they're so scared or excited they don't even really care about us. It's kind of a weird feeling to have been hunted this whole game, but now at this final crucial step everybody's too distracted to notice us? Oh well, we'll get them to pay attention somehow. I stumble into a side path that seems very out of place for the section of the game that we're currently in, and with the display board on the side, I immediately recognize that this is going to be the final achievement that we need to get, and we've missed some of the light balls on our way here, so we'll come back for this after we've done our replay. We managed to successfully avoid all of the scientists, and we found our way back into their machinery. But I still don't really know what the plan is. I follow a pipe down that leads to another pool of water. And obviously we see some glowing red handles, so we need to go ahead and take those off. We start pulling on the handle at the bottom of the room, and a fan gets going that sucks us up through a big tube and removes our clothes, launching us into a big pod where all of the scientists were watching before. At this point, I have no idea what's going on, but we see that they've been looking at a big ball of humanity, I guess, that's attached to some of these brain control things, and we spring into action trying to free them. But just as we manage to get the third of the 4 mind control devices ripped off, things change. We suddenly get grabbed and pulled back inside of this giant ball of humanity, so I guess this is us now. We've been pushed around a lot throughout this game, and now it's a little bit nice to have the strength of all of these people, and it's time for us to go on a little bit of a rampage, ripping the wall straight out of that container. Our first and only move, as we can only run in one direction, is to burst through the walls of our fellow science experiments. No reason to leave them in their cages. We crash our way out of the laboratory, and hey, we reunited with our army again. I guess this is another life, in a way. We continue wreaking havoc, running through a lot of the scientists' common areas. But while a lot of people are running and we're getting some people, there also seem to be a lot of people just standing around watching us. Eventually we get to some areas that seem distinctly set up like puzzles for us, including this puzzle where we need to point a beam at a button in the sky and then press it. This was the only puzzle that I needed to look the solution up for online because I just couldn't figure out that we had the sort of mobility with our arms to be able to point it straight up like that. As we continue pressing on, I really start to feel like maybe this is all still an experiment, and that becomes even more true when the solution to one of the puzzles involves us throwing a propulsion cube up to humans who help us out. Eventually we find our way in a room with a large number of humans looking at us in the background. Really, just look at how many people there are there. They continue dangling a cube above our head, and we just about get it before they drop the floor out from underneath us, and we get trapped, submerged in water once more. I guess this was supposed to be the end for us, but we're super strong, so we just go ahead and rip the bars off the wall, and we reunite with our fish pals one more time. We make our way to an area of the warehouse that we have definitely never been in our playthrough. We run up with all of our might to burst through the exterior wooden wall before we make our way outside and begin crashing down the nearby hill. We tumble through an absolute ton of nearby foliage. We're so big we're knocking down whole trees before eventually we come to a rest right at the edge of the water on a beach in a nice little field. At this point, me and everyone else in the theater are begging our little wrecking ball to stand back up and to keep fighting. We're clapping, there are tears dropping off of our faces, but it's not to be. This is where the game ends. We have come to a rest at the edge of the water, and the credits roll. A super cool thing about Playdead's games is how open to interpretation they are, and this one is definitely very open-ended. But we also have some other open ends in the remaining achievements we need to go grab, so let's do that. Inside shares Limbo's super cool chapter select system, where there's basically a bunch of small chapters that we can use to easily get the remaining achievements cleaned up. Our first stop is a return to the cornfield, where we basically just spam the grab button over and over again until eventually we find a hidden hatch. We climb down into a dark room where someone was developing photos of some sort, where we earn the achievement Field Research. The next achievement, we return to our big basket of pigs, but we need to go the opposite direction and rip down part of the barn, something that I didn't know was an option at the time. We climb up to the top of the barn and earn achievement number 11, Wee. For achievement number 12, we return to our beloved sub, this time going very far out of our way to the left of the screen and using the jump move to knock down a ladder from above. Once we climb up that ladder, we pretty easily find the next orb and earn our next achievement, a tableau. We get reunited with our army in the office one more time, where we get them to launch us up to grab the next orb, which earns us the achievement Office Space for doing an elevator pitch. What a great description. And finally, we return to that area that I expertly spotted at the very end of the game, where we obviously couldn't finish things. But now that we've got all of the other orbs, we can rip out the last one to earn the achievement, the last one, and now we have done everything in Inside. But how did we do? Inside was another pretty quick game that took me just under 4 hours, which is honestly pretty surprising because of how our playthrough of Limbo ended with the super challenging 5-death game mode that took me quite a few attempts to get down. I kind of expected the same thing out of Inside, but thankfully the devs were a little bit more generous here and we did not have to do that playthrough. This game definitely would have taken me quite a few more hours had I needed to do one of those, though I think maybe we would have had a slightly easier time than we did in Limbo. I hope, maybe. Like I mentioned in the video, I think a super cool thing about these games are how open-ended they are. There's no dialogue or anything, so everything is left up to the environmental storytelling and how you interpret it. Compared to Limbo, this game was definitely much more interested in like the humanity aspect, where in Limbo we dealt with people a little bit. In this one, it was pretty much constant throughout the whole thing, whether the people or the actual experiments that they were doing, it was kind of all involved together. I did a little bit of reading online, and it looks like Playdead's next game is supposed to be in space and a third-person game instead of the 2D games that they've been doing up to this point. That is super exciting, and hopefully it gets finished up pretty soon because it seems like it's been in the works pretty much since Inside wrapped up, so maybe that could be coming out soon, and I would definitely be interested in checking that out if that was the case because these games have been super fun to play. And as always, if you have any comments to leave about how I've misinterpreted the story, or any games that you want to recommend, you can feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I always love checking those out. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next week for the next one. Thanks so much for watching. See you!